On April 14, 1857, Beatrice of the United Kingdom, also known as Beatrice of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, was born. She was the fifth daughter and youngest child of the British Queen Victoria and her husband Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, and in marriage became the Princess of Battenberg. As a child, Beatrice was close to her mother, Queen Victoria, who grieved for her departed husband. When her older sisters got married and left the family, Beatrice became a reliable support for the Queen, who sincerely wished that she would stay close and not get married. Beatrice accepted her role with dignity and willingness, despite the many candidates who aspired to become part of the royal family, including Napoleon Eugene, the son of the deposed French emperor, and Ludwig IV, Grand Duke of Hesse, the widower of her older sister, although the laws of the time prohibited such marriages. In 1884, at the wedding of Beatrice's niece, Princess Victoria, she met Prince Henry of Battenberg, the son of Prince Alexander of Hesse-Darmstadt, and his morganatic wife, Julia von Gogh. After returning home, Beatrice announced to her mother her desire to marry Henry. After a year of persuasion and reflection, the Queen agreed to this marriage on the condition that Henry would leave his duties in Germany and remain in the UK forever, and Beatrice would continue to perform the duties of her mother's unofficial secretary. The wedding took place on July 23, 1885 on the Isle of Wight. Within 10 years of marriage, they had 3 sons and a daughter. In 1896, Henry persuaded the Queen to allow him to participate in the Anglo-Ashanti War, where he died of malaria on January 20. After his death, Beatrice stayed with her mother, helping her, and continued to perform royal duties. Beatrice passed away in 1944 at the age of 87, having outlived all her brothers and sisters, as well as her 2 children and several nephews and nieces, including King George V of Great Britain and the German Emperor Wilhelm II. Beatrice was born on April 14, 1857 at Buckingham Palace in London, being the 5th daughter and youngest child of 9 descendants of the British Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert. Her birth caused controversy, as the chloroform anesthesia applied by the Queen was then the subject of discussion due to the potential risks for both mother and child. Like her sisters, Beatrice received an education designed by her father and close friend Baron Stockmar. Her curriculum focused on practical skills such as household management, cooking, farming, woodworking, and language learning. Victoria and Albert supported a monarchy based on family values, and therefore the wardrobe of Beatrice and her siblings consisted of clothes for the middle class, and their bedrooms were modestly furnished and little heated. Before the birth of Beatrice, her favorite father was her eldest daughter Victoria, who married a Prussian prince in 1858 and was preparing for life in Germany. However, over time, little Beatrice was able to win the heart of her father, Prince Albert, showing signs of a bright mind. Albert appreciated smart people and wrote to his friend Stockmar that Beatrice was the funniest kid we've ever had. Her mother, Queen Victoria, also had a special feeling for her, considering her the most attractive of all her children, despite her previous tendency to consider newborn babies ugly. Victoria described Beatrice as a beautiful, full and blooming child with beautiful big blue eyes, a sweet mouth and delicate skin. Her long golden hair attracted attention and was depicted in a portrait commissioned by the Queen from the artist Richard Lauchert in the early 1860s. Beatrice also enjoyed special attention from her mother, including the rare moments when the Queen personally bathed her, which she did not do with her older children. Despite the strict educational program, Beatrice's childhood was more peaceful compared to her older siblings, thanks to the close relationship with her parents and the absence of the need to share attention with more numerous siblings. The atmosphere of family happiness in which Beatrice grew up was broken in 1861. On March 16, the Duchess of Kent, Queen Victoria's mother, died at Frogmore House, leaving the Queen a widow. This loss deeply hurt Victoria, and she felt guilty for the separation that happened between her and her mother at the beginning of her reign. At that moment, 4-year-old Beatrice tried to comfort her mother, telling her that the Duchess of Kent is now in heaven, but Beatrice herself believes that she will return. Despite these attempts at consolation, Victoria's grief was deep, and she began to isolate herself from society and her children. Her communication was limited only to the eldest unmarried daughter, Princess Alice, and little Beatrice. In December of the same year, a new tragedy befell the family when Prince Albert died at Windsor Castle on December 14. This event caused mourning throughout the court and aggravated the gloomy mood in the royal family, making entertainment dry and devoid of joy. Although the Queen did not at first consider the possibility of marriage for Beatrice, there were many candidates for her hand. One of them is the French Prince Napoleon Eugene, the only son of Emperor Napoleon III and his wife, Eugenie de Montijo. After the overthrow of the emperor and his family, their refugee status brought them to England in 1870, and after the death of Napoleon Eugene in 1873, Queen Victoria became close to his widow. Rumors of Beatrice's supposed engagement to Napoleon Eugene spread in the press, but ended with the death of the prince during the Anglo-Zulu War on June 1, 1879. Victoria reflected her bitterness in her diary, talking about how much Beatrice felt the loss, and how she herself was stunned by this news. After the death of the French prince, Beatrice's brother, the Prince of Wales, considered the possibility of a marriage between her and the Grand Duke of Hesse-Ludwig IV. This duke was previously married to Beatrice's older sister, Alice, who died during the diphtheria epidemic in 1878. The Prince of Wales hoped that Beatrice would be able to become a caring stepmother for Ludwig's children and at the same time take care of her mother, Victoria. He also believed that such a marriage would allow Queen Victoria to stay close to her Hessian grandchildren. However, at that time the law prohibited such marriages, and the Prince of Wales even attempted to pass an act through Parliament that would allow marriage between a man and his late wife's sister. Despite the support of the act from the public and the House of Commons, it was rejected by the House of Lords due to the opposition of the clergy. Queen Victoria, despite her support for the act and disappointment at its failure, was happy that her daughter stayed by her side. Among the other candidates for Beatrice's hand were the Battenberg brothers, Alexander and Ludwig, but none of them could win her heart. Alexander never officially proposed to Beatrice, simply hinting that maybe one day he will become her betrothed. Ludwig showed more interest in marrying the Queen's daughter and was even invited to dinner with them. However, Queen Victoria took a place between him and Beatrice, ordering the princess to ignore the prince in order to protect her from the proposal. Ludwig could not understand why Beatrice was silent and hoped for a marriage for several years, but eventually he married another woman, the daughter of Victoria and Alice, Beatrice's older sister. Beatrice was invited to the wedding of Ludwig and Victoria in Darmstadt, where she met and fell in love with the groom's younger brother, Prince Heinrich, who fell in love with her. After returning from Darmstadt and declaring her intention to get married, Beatrice faced a silent reaction from her mother, the Queen. For 7 months they hardly spoke to each other, preferring to exchange notes. This unusual behavior of the Queen, which surprised even her family, was explained by her fear of losing her daughter. Despite the fact that Beatrice was already an adult woman, the Queen continued to see her as her baby, an innocent child. She feared that physical intimacy with a man, inevitable after marriage, would mean the end of innocence for her daughter. The family conflict was an attempt to resolve the Princess of Wales and the Queen's eldest daughter, Crown Princess of Prussia. They reminded the mother of the happiness that Beatrice brought to her departed husband. These memories inspired Victoria to resume communication with her daughter. The Queen agreed to the marriage, but on condition that Henry renounce all his German obligations and remain in the UK forever. Their wedding ceremony took place on July 23, 1885 at Street, Mildred's Church in Whippingham, near the Osborne House residence. Beatrice was awarded a wedding dress made of white satin, decorated with orange blossom and lace with a lace skirt, as well as a veil made of Honiton lace, which the Queen herself wore on her wedding day. Her head was decorated with a diamond tiara given by her mother. Her mother and the Prince of Wales escorted her down the aisle. Among the bridesmaids were her nieces, as well as the groom's brothers. The wedding of Beatrice and Henry was attended by many members of the royal family and prominent political figures. Only the eldest daughter of Queen Victoria and her husband, as well as former Prime Minister William Gladstone and Mary Adelaide of Cambridge, who was in mourning for her father-in-law, were missing. Immediately after the wedding, the newlyweds went on their honeymoon to a cozy place on the north coast of the Isle of Wight, to the Quor Abbey House estate, owned by the Cochrane family. Minnie Cochrane, Beatrice's close friend and lady-in-waiting, welcomed them and made this place a cozy refuge for the two of them to start a new life. Initially, Queen Victoria treated this marriage with some timidity, but gradually her feelings for Henry and Beatrice became warmer. Among the wedding gifts that Beatrice and Henry received, an exquisite silver tea set from banker and philanthropist Moses Montefiore stood out, on which was engraved, "Many daughters acted masterfully, but you surpassed them all." The Times newspaper, which published an article shortly before the princess wedding, wrote, "Your Royal Highness's devotion to our beloved Queen has won sincere admiration and deep gratitude. May the blessing that you have always given to others come back to you in full." In her last years, when the princess was already over 70 years old, Beatrice continued to maintain written communication with her friends and relatives, and her appearances in public places became rare. However, one of the last such moments was the participation in the wreath-laying ceremony at the grave of her nephew, King George V, who had died just 3 days earlier, on January 23, 1936. At that time, the princess's health was severely undermined by rheumatism, and she could only move around in a wheelchair. There are also suggestions that since about 1940, the letters attributed to the princess were actually written by her maid of honor, Minnie Cochrane, as evidenced by one of the letters sent by Minnie herself on October 28, 1940. In 1941, Beatrice released her last work entitled In the Time of Napoleon. This book was a translation of the personal diaries of her great-grandmother on the female side, Augusta Rice Ebersdorf. In addition, she maintained a correspondence with the publisher John Murray, who highly appreciated her creative contribution. After a long journey, Princess Beatrice found her last refuge in the country house of Brentridge Park in West Sussex. This house belonged to Queen Mary's brother, the Earl of Athlone, and his wife, Princess Alice, who was Beatrice's niece. At that time, the Atlones were in Canada, where the Count served as Governor-General. It was in Brentridge, on the night before the anniversary of the death of her son Moritz, that Beatrice died in her sleep on October 26, 1944. After the farewell ceremony, which took place on November 3 in the chapel of St. George of Windsor Castle, Beatrice's coffin was placed in the royal tomb. In accordance with the last will of the princess, on August 28, 1945, the coffin was moved to the Isle of Wight and placed in the grave of her husband, Heinrich Battenberg, at St. Mildred's Church in Whippingham. On the same day, a private memorial service was held, attended only by Beatrice's son, the Marquis of Carisbrooke.